Hey y'all, Brian S. Pratt here. Going to read chapter 15 of Shepherd's Quest, book 1 of the Broken Key Trilogy. I'm a little bit delayed today. Took my boy down to Dallas early this morning. He's flying out to Phoenix to see his mom for Mother's Day, and she's getting married. So yay! All right. So quick recap on chapter where we're at in the story. Chad, Ryan, and Bart have gone to Crag Keep on the borderlands between the Goblin territories and humans to find out where a location is. They have a piece of the key that they suspect will open the King's Horde. Now, the key itself, on the back of it, was a map, and they don't recognize what's on the map with anywhere. They tried the magistrate's office, but the map there didn't show anything. So now that they're going to Crag Keep, where they've heard that there's a much larger one that they can hopefully locate where this place is, so they can find the next possible section of the key, maybe a clue. We don't know yet, unless you've read the story, of course. So here's chapter 15. They have arrived at Castle Keep. They've just gone inside through the front gate, and now they're in the courtyard. And they saw an inn at the end of chapter 14. They were headed to the inn, and that was the end of chapter 14. The inn had very little in the way of amenities for its guests. The rooms were quite small. In fact, they were forced to share a single room with but one small bed. Still, it was better than sleeping outside on the ground. They had but two choices for dinner. One was the stew the inn provided, or the food they had brought with them. Forget about entertainment. There was a very small spot upon which a bard of some kind could have performed, but none made an appearance. Ryan commented to the others that he thought it unlikely a bard ever came that way. Once they finished eating, they stepped outside and tried to figure a way into the keep. The same two guards were still standing there to either side of the entrance. Any attempt at scaling the walls would be immediately seen. The prospect of gaining admittance seemed remote in the extreme. "We could still ask," Ryan said. "I don't think that would be such a good idea," countered Bart. "Though, if no other opportunity presents itself, we may be left with little choice." For over an hour, they wandered around the courtyard, all the while maintaining an eye on the keep while trying to appear like they weren't. Finally, Bart noticed two men emerge between the two guards as they left the keep. They were dressed like merchants and were making their way over to where the 5 wagons sat. Bart watched them cross the courtyard and grew thoughtful. Ryan noticed him following the two men with his eyes and asked, "What?" "Those two men just came out of the keep," he said. "I wonder what they were doing in there." "Good question," Chad said. "Maybe we should go over and ask them." Bart turned to him and nodded. "I think I will." Before Ryan and Chad could say anything, he stepped out and hurried over to the caravan's camp. What does he think he's doing?" asked Chad. He had been kidding when he suggested they go talk with him. "I don't know," replied Ryan. Then he watched as Bart arrived at the wagon and started talking with the two men. "I hope he doesn't get us into trouble." They remained where they were in the courtyard until whatever conversation Bart had been having came to an end. Then he turned around and headed back toward the inn. He indicated with a nod that they should meet him there. They came together at the inn's entrance. "So?" asked Ryan. "Inside the keep is where you acquire your permit to travel across the pass to the marketplace," he explained. "You need a permit?" asked Chad. "So it would seem," replied Bart. He grinned and said, "This is just what we needed." "They're not going to give us a permit," Ryan stated. We have no logical reason for going over there." "We can use the same story Bart used to get us in here," suggested Chad, "that we are waiting for our father's caravan." "But we can't prove that," objected Ryan. "Look," said Bart, "if we can just get past the guards at the entrance, then it doesn't matter if we get a pass or not. Permit. Sorry. Get permit or not. Sometimes this goes well, sometimes it does not. All we really need is to look at the map in the Great Hall." Chad looked to Ryan and shrugged. "It's worth a try." "All right," he agreed. The worst they could do was not let us in. Bart gave him a grin and said, "That's the spirit, let's go." They left the front of the inn and made their way toward the entrance to the keep. Riyan felt his insides tighten up in nervousness that he prayed wasn't mirrored on his face. As they approached the guards, Bart took the lead. One stepped forward and held up a hand indicating they were to stop. "Sorry, boys, but the keep is off limits," he explained. "We're going to see about getting permits for our father's wagons before they arrived in the morning," Bart said in complete sincerity. "Permits?" the guard asked. "That's right," he replied. "Our father wanted to see if the goblins would be willing to purchase some jewelry and trinkets that he recently acquired." "Usually, the permits aren't issued until the wagons are actually here," explained the guard. "I know," continued Bart. "Last year we were here with the wagons and it wasn't a problem. Is Sergeant Akers still issuing the permits?" "Yes, he is," the guard replied. His manner seemed to relax just a little. "How is his little girl doing?" Bart asked. "Still giving him problems?" "Oh, you know it," the guard said with a grin. "She's not so little anymore. She drives him crazy whenever he's home on leave." "Is he still in the same room as last year?" Bart asked. "Yes," the guard said. "Down the hall, fourth door on the right." "Thank you," Bart said, and moved forward to enter the keep. Behind him, Chad and Riyan followed, and to their astonishment, the guard stepped aside and allowed them to enter. Once they left the guards behind, they entered a large hall. At present, no one was in sight. Riyan tried to ask him about how he knew so much about this Sergeant Akers, but Bart waved him to silence. "Later," he said. At the far end of the hall was the corridor the guard had referred to. Another corridor left the hall to their right. Two closed doors sat in the wall to their left. "Which way?" asked Chad. "You got me," replied Bart. "Let's hope we find it before they find us." Moving quickly to the corridor on their right, he soon left the hall behind as he made his way deeper into the keep. Sconces bearing lit torches lined the walls, both in the hall and in the corridors extending from it. The great hall had to be in a prominent location. It would stand to reason that they would want it to be very accessible to visitors. With that in mind, Bart moved down the corridor, and with the other two right behind, all three tried to be as quiet as possible. The corridor extended for over 100 feet before ending at a closed door. Other doors had sat along either side of the corridor, some open and some closed. The closed ones they left closed, and only paused a moment to peer through the open ones. They were making sure that there was no one on the other side who might see them pass. Not to mention making sure the door didn't open onto the main hall, though Bout doubted if any of these doors would do that. They simply were not in what he felt was the right place. When they reached the door at the end, Bart listened at it for a few moments until he was certain it was quiet on the other side. Then he opened the door slowly and peered around. There he found another corridor running perpendicular to the one they were in. Suddenly, footsteps were heard approaching down the corridor on the other side of the door. Bart closed it quickly and turned to the others. "Someone's coming," he said. They moved back quickly to the closest door to them and opened it. Fortunately, it opened onto a storage room, and they hurried inside. No sooner had they closed the door than they heard the opening of the door at the end of the corridor. The footsteps walked toward them along the corridor. They listened with growing worry as they drew abreast of the door, then relaxed when they continued on past. A second or two later, they heard another door open and close. Bart cracked open the door to the storage room and looked out. The corridor was once again empty. "Come on," he said to the other two. Opening the door wider, he left the storage room and made his way back to the door at the end of the corridor. This time there were no footsteps to be heard, and both ways were deserted. Waving for the others to follow, he passed through the doorway and followed the corridor to the left. The corridor they found themselves in now was fairly similar to the one they had just left. Vacated. Let's do vacated. Voices could be heard coming from up ahead, and Bart had them pause in a small alcove as they listened. A few seconds later, they determined that the voices were neither approaching nor moving away. So they returned to the corridor and resumed their progress. 30 feet farther down stood an open doorway, and it was from there that the voices originated. He motioned for Riyan and Chad to remain where they were as he continued forward to peer into the room. Creeping forward silently, he reached the edge of the open door and very slowly looked around to the other side. It turned out to be a room where several soldiers were taking their ease before a fireplace. The table where they sat had a pitcher of ale and several cups resting on top. One of the men faced in such a way that the doorway was in his direct line of sight. However, in Bart's opinion, the man appeared rather drunk and may not notice should they pass quickly across the doorway. Turning back to the others, He waved them forward. When they reached his side, he said, need to be quick. Once he received nods of understanding, he stepped out and very quickly walked by the doorway. Riyan and Chad followed close behind. Bart didn't stop when they reached the other side. Instead, he kept leading them forward as he listened for anything that might indicate they were seen by the men in the room behind them. When nothing materialized, he breathed a sigh of relief and continued down. Several other corridors at times branched off, but Bart continued following the corridor they were in. Each time they came to a branching, they would slow down, check for anyone in the other corridor, then proceed when clear. It was the third such branching to the left when they saw what had to be the great hall opening up at the end of the new corridor. I think that's it, he said as he turned them down it. When Riyan and Chad entered the corridor, they agreed with him. The corridor extended for about 20 feet before opening up on a large hall with many tables set in 3 neat rows running from one end to the other. A servant was seen passing through toward one of the exits on the far side. They waited until the servant had left the great hall before they entered. As they stepped from the corridor, Riyan glanced up at the vaulting ceiling that arched overhead. Wow, he breathed in awe as the sheer size of the room overpowered him. He had never been in such a massive place before, other than what they had found in the crypt. We don't have time for gawking, Bart admonished them. Let's find the map and get out of here. They looked for the map and didn't see it. From what Bart had said, it should have been quite large and out in the open. Then Chad turned around and looked at the wall through which they had just emerged. I think I found it, he said. The other two turned around and saw that most of the wall was painted with a map depicting a large portion of the kingdom of Beardland, of which the lands of Duke York were but a part. It also showed the mountains to the west that separated the goblin lands from theirs and beyond. There's Quillim, exclaimed Chad. Riyan looked where he pointed and saw a tiny dot with the name of their town upon it. It isn't that big, he said. No, it isn't, said Bart as he backed away from the wall to get a better view. As much as he had stared at the map on the piece of the key when he was laid up in bed, he had the area depicted upon it memorized. His eyes scanned the map and came to a section that matched what was on the key. Just on the other side of the mountains from Crag Keep was the larger of the 2 lakes. It sat a little bit west and north of the marketplace. From its northern shore, a river extended northward to the smaller lake where they figured the rest of the key to be, or at least some indication of where to look for it. He frowned slightly when he saw that the area on the shore of the smaller lake showed nothing at all. The map on the key had indicated there was something there, yet on this map, nothing. Maybe they don't know about it, he mumbled to himself. What? Asked Riyan. He pointed to the 2 lakes and said, That's the area inscribed on the back of the key. Riyan and Chad both turned their gaze toward it. Riyan was about to pull forth a piece of the key to compare when Bart stopped him. Not here, he advised against it. I know that is it. He committed the general area of the 2 lakes to memory, then indicated they should leave. What are you doing in here? A voice asked. Turning around in surprise, they saw a middle-aged man in uniform. He stared at them with a rather unpleasant expression. Began Riyan, then grew silent under the man's stern glare. We were trying to find the room where we were told we could acquire permits. Still have passes for some reason. For our caravan to travel to the marketplace in the morning, Bart replied. Yeah, added Chad, we should have lost our way. The soldier stayed there for a moment and then said, Come this way. He turned around and headed to a corridor that left the room. After 2 steps, he paused and glanced back to make sure they were following. When he saw that they were, he continued. Riyan glanced at Bart and could see the worry he felt mirrored on his friend's face. They followed the soldier as he worked his way through the keep. Along the way, they passed several other soldiers moving about on various errands. The soldier finally came to a stop before a door. You can get your permits in here, he said. When I originally wrote this, I put passes instead of permits and everything, but it needs to be permits. He said, Don't let me catch you wandering around again. You won't, Bart assured him. We promise. Giving them a nod, the soldier left them standing before the door as he returned back the way they had come. Let's get out of here, urged Chad. Not yet, replied Bart. Taking the handle of the door, he opened it and walked in. They found it to be a rather small room with but a single desk covered in neat stacks of papers sitting before the door. Behind the desk was a soldier who had to be Sergeant Akers. He looked when the door opened and asked, Can I help you? Bart nodded and stepped up to the desk. Riyan and Chad followed him in. We need to procure permits for the wagons our father will be bringing up tomorrow, Bart explained. Sorry, son, Sergeant Akers said as he leaned back in his chair. We don't give out permits until we've had a chance to look the goods over. The guards out front should have explained that to you. I just thought we could expedite things so father could head up as soon as he arrived, Bart stated. I hate to disappoint you, but the procedure is for your father, who is the master of the caravan, to apply for the permits. The sergeant explained. When he arrives, you tell him to come see me. Bart assumed a despondent look and said, Very well. Sorry to have bothered you. That's okay, Sergeant Akers assured him. Bart turned around and ushered Ryan and Chad out ahead of him. Once out in the corridor, they turned and headed for the exit. They remained silent until they passed the two guards that were standing watch. They returned to the inn and were back in their room. Now, why do we have to talk to the sergeant? Asked Chad. And how did you know his name in the first place? Bart grinned. When I went over to talk to those merchants before we went in, that's when I found out his name. Once I found out why they were inside the keep, I wormed out the name of the man we were to see. It's always easier to enter a place you aren't supposed to be if it appears you know what's going on and have been there before. Since I was convincing enough to make the guard out front believe that we were here last year, he was more inclined to allow us entry. Weren't you taking a risk? Bart shrugged. I suppose so, but the worst he would have done was deny us entry. We would have been no worse off than we were before. Okay, well, what about going in and talking to Sergeant Akers? Chad asked. That would seem a total waste of time. Bart grinned and shook his head. No, it wasn't. He put his left hand in the right sleeve of his tunic, and pulled out several pieces of paper. He held them up and grinned all the wider. You stole those? Asked Ryan. Of course, he replied. How else were we to get permits? He spread them out on the bed and they went through them. They were all permits allowing the bearer to proceed through the pass to the marketplace. Tomorrow morning, we tag along with that caravan out there, and we're on our way. Let's see the key, Bart told Ryan. Ryan took out the key and laid it on the bed next to the permits. Pointing to a spot just south of the mountains, Bart said, We're here. Then he moved his finger to the other side of the mountains. We crossed here, and then we're at the marketplace. From there, we skirted around this lake. His finger moved it around the southern edge of the lower lake to the other side. Then we follow the river up to this other lake, where hopefully we'll find something that will lead us to the rest of the key. I hope you both realize that once we leave the protection of the marketplace, that will be in goblin territory, Bart explained. From what I've heard, they don't take kindly to trespassers. Ryan nodded. I know. We'll simply have to make sure we avoid them. Bart laughed. Easier said than done. I say the risks are worth the rewards, Ryan insisted. The risk being our continued existence, Chad clarified. Ryan glanced from one to the other. But what existence would we be losing? I already lost the one I love. Bart, you have a death mark on you. And Chad, do you really want to spend the rest of your life as a miller? Chad shook his head. Hardly. All right, Ryan said with finality. Either we succeed or we die trying. You say that so easily now, Bart said. How are you going to feel when you are being skinned alive for some goblin's roasting spit? Ryan didn't reply. This was the only way he could see for him to get Freya back. He had to take the risk. Later that evening, when Ryan and Chad were getting ready to fall asleep, Bart offered for them to share the bed. He said he didn't mind the floor. They happily agreed and were soon lying side by side on the cramped little bed. Ryan could understand why Bart preferred the floor every time Chad's elbow nailed him in the side. Despite the tight sleeping arrangements, Ryan was soon asleep. At some point in the night, he awoke and saw Bart sitting at the table. A candle burned next to him as he worked on something. Sleepily, Ryan started to ask, What? Bart turned his head toward him and said, Go back to sleep, Ryan. Laying his head on the pillow, Ryan quickly fell back to sleep and slept through the rest of the night. In the morning when Ryan awoke, he saw Bart lying on the floor in front of the door with his head propped on top of his pack. In the bed next to him, Chad stirred, and he elbowed him to get up. It's morning, Bart. Ryan hollered over to him. Bart came awake quickly and asked, It is? Looking to the window, he saw the light coming through. Damn, he exclaimed. Coming to his feet, he grabbed his boots and started to pull them on. We've got to hurry. Why? Ryan asked as he got out of bed. After you two fell asleep, I went and talked with a couple of the guards who were escorting the caravan, he explained. They said they were pulling out early this morning. If we want to go with them, we need to hurry. He again looked to the light coming through the window as he pulled his last boot on. Getting to his feet, he said, I'll get the horses ready. You two get a move on. With that, he opened the door and left. Ryan elbowed a still sleeping Chad a little harder this time and said, Wake up. Chad mumbled something and promptly fell back to sleep. Exasperated with his friend, Ryan placed both hands on Chad's back and shoved him off the bed. Arms and legs went in all directions as he tumbled over the edge and hit the floor. We don't have much time, Ryan said as Chad sat up on the floor. He tried to hide the smile that threatened to break out. The caravan is pulling out early. Oh, he said and quickly pulled his boots on and grabbed his pack. By the time they were ready and left the room, Bart had 2 of the horses saddled and was almost done with a third. Ryan saw the wagons that had been over to the side of the courtyard were already trundling their way toward the gate leading through the outer wall. About time you two showed up, Bart said. When Ryan and Chad reached the horses, he cinched the last buckle, then turned to them. Here, he said, and handed each of them one of the permits he appropriated the night before. What are we going to do with these? They're not even signed. They are now, replied Bart. Quit talking, let's get moving. Ryan took a moment to open the paper. Sure enough, there at the bottom was a signature. He was about ready to ask Bart how this came to be when the memory of Bart working at the table last night returned to him. It was one thing to try to sneak through the past, quite another to bear forged documents. He was not entirely sure what it was, but the penalty for that would have to be severe. Getting into the saddle, he and Chad followed Bart as he rode toward the wagons. He made sure that the wagons were on the other side before catching up with them. One of the guards riding at the rear saw them coming and grinned. Wasn't sure if you were going to make it, Bart, the guard said. Nodding to Ryan and Chad, Bart replied, They overslept. The guard laughed. Another member of the caravan on a horse saw the guard talking with them and slowed down until they had caught up. What's this? The man asked. Just a fellow I shared a fire with last night, the guard replied. He and his friends are trying to catch up with a caravan that has already reached the marketplace. Do you boys have permits? Bart held up his as did Ryan and Chad. The man didn't look entirely pleased with the situation, but didn't say anything. Nudging his horses in the sides, he quickened his pace until he returned to where he was before moving back. Grumpy, Bart commented to the guard. You can say that, he replied with a grin. I think he's more upset that another caravan beat him there than that you are riding with us. Might be best if you and your friends were to drop back a bit. Sure, Bart said. And the others slowed down until about 30 feet separated them and the rear guard of the caravan. Up ahead, the canyon that Crag Keep sat in grew narrower. The river coursed its way through the opening over thunderous cataracts as it left the mountains. At the narrowest point, the road went through an area barely wide enough for 2 wagons side by side. It was at that point a score of soldiers were stationed to be sure travelers heading across the pass to the marketplace had all the necessary documentation. When the caravan drew near, one of the soldiers moved forward and began checking the permits of the guards and the drivers of the wagon. The master of the caravan remained with the soldier until he was satisfied that all was in order and waved the caravan on through. Ryan's heart beat rapidly when it was their turn to approach the soldier. Good morning, young sirs. Need to see your permits before you can proceed. No problem, Bart said and handed his over to the guard. Ryan and Chad did the same. Ryan was poised to flee as soon as the soldier discovered the permits were forgeries. But to his amazement, the soldier handed them back and waved them on through. He almost couldn't believe they had pulled it off. Once they were past and had put some distance between them and the soldiers, Ryan asked Bart how he had managed it. Bart grinned. Quite easy, actually. Last night while you and Chad were sleeping, I left the room and went over to where a couple of the caravan guards were relaxing around a fire. One thing led to another, and I was invited to share it with them. It was quite easy to lift their permits off of them and take them back to our room. Then I studied the signature, copied it onto ours. After that, it was a simple matter to return the permits to their owners. Something your father taught you? Chad asked. Actually, no, he replied, and offered no further explanation. And so that's chapter 15. They've gotten past the checkpoint and they're heading through the pass towards the marketplace. Then after that, it's Goblin territory. And then it gets kind of, the pace picks up a little bit at that point. So it's looking kind of good for them right now. They're feeling good. Bart's got all kinds of stuff. And apparently forgery was not something his father taught him, so someone else taught him forgery. Who? We don't know yet. And we still don't know what all skills Bart may still have. Ryan and Chad, of course, I guess they have swords, so what, their fighters level 0.5, 1. They can hold a sword, and that's about all they can do with it. And then they're going to come across their fourth companion pretty soon. I like him. Kevik was my favorite guy. Because he was an apprentice, bereft of his master, before he really could learn anything of any use. He only had 3-4 spells, I think it was. But he used them in such creative ways that those simple spells got them out of so many life-threatening situations. It's not what you know; it's how you use what you know. That knowledge is everything, and I always believe that. Probably that's why, going back to the Morscythe saga, Morscythe is the god of knowledge. His priests were teachers because knowledge is the greatest power in the universe. So, okay, now personal stuff. If you don't like personal stuff, just I'll see you tomorrow on chapter 16. Well, anyway, so I went to visit my girlfriend yesterday. She had a 360 infusion, which means that they have the vertebrae and they put in the wedges. They go in from the back on Tuesday. They went from the back and put, I think, 3, maybe 4 wedges between the vertebrae because they were starting to deteriorate. And then on Thursday, they went into the front to secure them. Now, unfortunately, I don't know why, but going into the front only allowed them access to one of those. So they had to come in from the side to do the other ones. In doing so, they had to move one of her leg muscles, the big leg muscle that goes down the side. They had to move it. And so when I went to see her yesterday, she was in a lot of pain. She could barely move. They took the catheter out. So while I was there for 4 hours, she went to the bathroom 3 times. That girl loves to drink water. Anyway, so she had to get up. I suppose getting up is good for her. Her daughter's a nurse, so she was under the care of a professional. They didn't wait for the other nurse to come in. They just, her daughter just unhooked everything and took her to the bathroom and hooked her back up again, no problem. Which I guess is nice if you was it a nice reason to have your daughter be a nurse? And on her back, she's got almost a foot-long series of tapes. I guess they cut her open that much. About mid-back down to her almost her pelvic bone. And she got a side thing going. Oh, she's in a lot of pain. And most of the time I was there, I just sat and held her hand because she slept through most of my visit. But every time she would wake up, she would see me and smile. So it made it all worthwhile. I think I mentioned this in an earlier little notice I said about this chapter being late, but that's okay. I'll say it again. And I was there for about 4 hours, which was a good visit. We talked some when she wasn't sleeping. Her daughter was there along with her granddaughter Valerie. I love Valerie. She's really cute. I love kids. Can't wait for my own. Don't know when I'll get one. Don't know if I'll get one, but that's the problem with training your kids. Bring them up right. You don't have grandkids early on. So if you want to have grandkids early on, don't train them right. Let them be promiscuous, and you'll have plenty of grandkids. I know that's bad, but sometimes you just want grandkids. And so And I got back here about 10 o'clock last night. And my son, he had a 7:55 a.m. flight out of Dallas. We fly out of we take Southwest out of Dallas Love Field, which is almost a 2.5 hour drive from here. And he wanted to stop at IHOP on the way down, which was fine because he was buying me breakfast. French toast meal, always the French toast meal at IHOP. He likes the Cinestacks, which they have. If you haven't had the Cinestacks, it's just like eating candy. So we left here at 3 a.m. So I got to sleep about 10:30, woke up at 2:30, drove 2.5 hours down there, dropped him off. Then as I was leaving, I saw the cell phone lot. I was really tired, so I pulled in there and I slept for about a half hour. And I was fine after that. Then I came home and relaxed for a little bit, and now I'm doing this. So I should be on schedule for the foreseeable future for doing this. Only thing that might stop me is if I have an early morning thunderstorm. Otherwise, I'm on track. So I'll see you tomorrow, and we'll see how Ryan and Chad and Bart is doing. See what happens when they get to the marketplace. See what happens when they enter goblin territory. Will they find it? Will they not find it? Will they die? Tune in next week. Y'all take care. Bye.